So I'm going to be doing a video response to a question that I received addressing a video that I did recently in which I said that we are currently going through the biggest vibe shift in our time, and by that I was talking about how we are currently witnessing a revival of Nazism, which is very surreal, and that goes without saying. And so somebody asked me a question as a comment for this video. And this question comes from Laonda5673, and it says, I agree 100% with everything that you said in this video. However, I have just one question to ask you, which is, in your opinion, is it ever possible to have German nationalism without Nazism like there was in Germany during the reign of Otto von Bismarck? Or is it simply impossible to have one without the other after what had happened during World War II? That is a good question. And what I will say to you is, you should ask that question to the German nationalists. Now, I don't say that to be rude. I am simply presenting to you a rhetorical response. It's a rhetorical response. That question should be presented to the German nationalists today. Now, why do I say this? Because if you look at the face of German nationalism today, you will see the AfD, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party. Now, this is the party that a lot of American conservatives are getting very, very excited about. They're very excited about the AfD. They're very happy and enthusiastic and very exuberant and jubilant about the fact that the AfD is now the second biggest party in Germany. So there's all this talk about the AfD and how this is so great. It is so great to see a resurgence in German nationalism. And such excitement bespeaks really an ahistorical perspective of the world and really an ahistorical way of thinking. This way of talking, this manner of rhetoric really comes from a mindset that is absent of looking into history, absent of caring about history. And it goes back to what one professor by the name of J. Rufus Fears said many years ago. He said that American society is ahistorical, and it truly, truly is ahistorical. Because if it was not ahistorical, then we would be worried about the AfD. Conservatives would be worried about the AfD. And I have a lot to say about this. But let me first deal with your question. Is it ever possible to have German nationalism without Nazism? This question should be presented to the AfD. The AfD is the biggest German nationalist party right now, and it's filled with Nazis. It's filled with Nazis. The major leader of the AfD, Alice Weidel, she is currently the chairwoman of the party, and Alice Weidel refuses to celebrate the victory over the Nazis.
Also hier die Niederlage des eigenen Landes zu befeiern mit einer ehemaligen Besatzungsmacht, das ist etwas, wo ich für mich persönlich entschieden habe, auch mit der Fluchtgeschichte meines Vaters, daran nicht teilzunehmen.
Why is that? Why? Because she's a Nazi. She's a German nationalist. And she will say, I am not a Nazi, I am a German nationalist. Then why do you refuse to celebrate the victory over the Nazis in World War II? If you, as a German nationalist, are arguing that your German nationalism has nothing to do with Nazism, if you are arguing that German nationalism has nothing to do with Nazism, or that you can have a German nationalism without Nazism, then why do you refuse, Alice Weidel, the friend of Elon Musk, to celebrate the victory over the Nazis in World War II? Because you're a Nazi. So you should be asking the question to the AfD. You should be asking the current day German nationalists, why is it that you guys cannot have a German nationalist party or movement without being filled with Nazis? Why is that? Is it beyond your capabilities? Is it beyond your means? Why is it that one of the major leaders, if not the biggest leader of the AfD, Bjorn Höcke, why is it that Bjorn Höcke wrote articles praising the Third Reich. Why is that? Because he's a Nazi. Why is it that Bjorn Höcke expresses his hatred towards Holocaust memorials? Because he's a Nazi. So you should be asking Bjorn Höcke, why is it that you cannot lead a German nationalist party without expressing hatred towards Holocaust memorials? Why is that, Bjorn Höcke? Is it beyond your capabilities? Is it beyond your capacity? Is it beyond your means that you cannot lead a German nationalist movement or a German nationalist party without expressing Nazism, without expressing Nazi sentiment? Why is it that you express hatred towards Holocaust memorials? Why is it that you were writing articles praising the Third Reich? Why is that? Because you're a Nazi. And you, as a German nationalist, cannot separate your German nationalism from Nazism. So the question would be an excellent question to make for the AfD. Why can't they lead a party without being filled with Nazis? Now you bring up Otto von Bismarck and you say, well, can we have a German nationalism like that of Otto von Bismarck? Well, I am sure that I'm not really sure actually, but you can have, I'll just put it this way. You can have a party or a movement that declares itself as Bismarckian, right? You could have a German nationalist movement arise calling itself Bismarckian. It would still be evil. It would still be evil and murderous. Now, why do I say this? Because look at von Bismarck's ideology. Bismarck's ideology was one of German supremacy. He believed that the German race was superior to the Polish race. He wasn't a Nazi. Now, the Nazis agreed with him. The Nazis believed in the same thing. They believed that the German race was superior to the Polish race. They agreed. So with Bismarck, you have this idea of German supremacy, and with Hitler, you have this idea of German supremacy. And von Bismarck led a policy of Germanization, and he imposed this policy on the Polish subjects of Germany. And he told the Poles, you must become German. You have to forsake your Polish identity and become German. Speak German. And if you have a Catholic priest who is Polish, he has to leave. And they would force out the Polish Catholic priests and replace them with German Catholic priests. This is racism. This is German racism. This is an ideology of German supremacy. Von Bismarck compared the Poles to wolves. He said, just as a wolf cannot control his wild nature, so a Polish person also cannot control his wild nature. And so the only solution to the Polish problem, according to Bismarck, was to exterminate the Poles. This is what Bismarck said. The only solution to the Poles is to exterminate them. Because you had Polish people who didn't want to be under German occupation. They didn't want to be under the German government. And so you had Polish people who tried to do an uprising. And so Bismarck said, okay, I need to exterminate these people. And I'll read to you the quote from Bismarck. And this quote does not disagree. It does not disagree in any way with Adolf Hitler. And this is what von Bismarck wrote. He said, hit the Poles so hard that they despair of their life. I have full sympathy with their condition, but if we want to survive, we can only exterminate them. The wolf, too, cannot help having been created by God as he is, but people shoot him for it if they can. So in other words, the Pole is an animal, or he's like an animal. He's like a ravenous wild dog, ravenous wild wolf. And just as a wolf cannot control his ravenous wild nature, so a Pole cannot control his unlikable nature. And so we must exterminate the Polish race. And so if you want to have a Bismarckian nationalism, that would also entail the idea of German supremacy. German supremacy over Slavs. German supremacy over Germany's neighbors. And Bismarck expelled 30,000 Polish people and Jewish people out of Germany. Kicked them out. Why? Because they were Poles? Because they were Jews? That's why. So you see what? Anti-Jewish sentiment in Bismarck, and you see anti-Polish sentiment in Bismarck. And what do you see in Hitler? The same thing. Anti-Polish, anti-Jewish. Hitler simply carried out what Bismarck wanted to do. Hitler orchestrated a genocide of the Polish people. Millions of Polish people were exterminated by the Third Reich because the Germans said that the Poles are inferior to us, and they agreed with Bismarck, and they simply carried out what Bismarck wanted, which was for the extermination of the Polish people. Bismarck set the stage for Nazism. Bismarck helped to create the environment in which it was conducive for Nazism to thrive. So you can have Bismarckian nationalism, but it will be evil. So you say, is it ever possible to have German nationalism without Nazism? Well, I'll ask you this question. Do you think that it's ever possible to have Turkish nationalism without denying the Armenian genocide or making excuses for the Armenian genocide? The answer is no, it's not possible. Because if you talk to any Turkish nationalist, be he secular or religious, he will express to you either denial of the Armenian genocide or making excuses for the Armenian genocide. And if you look at the Turkish nationalist movement today, you see what? Turkish supremacy, the ideology that the Turkish race is superior, the ideology that says that the Armenian genocide either did not happen or that it needed to happen because Turkey was in the middle of a war with Armenian separatists, or that Turkey was in the middle of a war with Russia and a lot of the Armenians were pro-Russia, so they needed to be killed. So is it possible to have Turkish nationalism without this sort of insidious ideology? Well, ask the Turkish nationalists. Why is it that you guys can't stop denying the Armenian genocide or making excuses for murder? Why is that? And so the same thing can be applied to the German nationalists. Can you have German nationalism without Nazism? The answer is no. That is the short answer. Now, why do I say this? The reason why I say this is because of the word nationalism. The very meaning of the word nationalism. Nationalism basically means you are going to defend the evils of your country, or you are going to make excuses for the evils of your country. Nationalism is being proud of your country with a vicious arrogance and hubris. Nationalism is not the same as patriotism. Patriotism is when you say, I will defend my country for a good cause. If my country is being invaded, I will defend my country. I want to do good for my country. I want to do something productive for my country. That is patriotism. Nationalism is when you say, it doesn't really matter what evils my country has done. I will glorify my country. And if my country has done atrocities, I will either deny them or I will make excuses for those evils. That is what nationalism entails. This is why I say that you cannot have German nationalism without sympathy for Nazism. If you are going to get into German nationalism, well, that would involve defending the evils that your country has done. Or it would be denying that those evils were ever done. And so, if you want to revive German nationalism, then you shouldn't be surprised if Nazis are coming to your meetings. If you want to revive German nationalism and you say, okay, I'm going to do this meeting, I rented out this building, we're going to have a meeting to revive German nationalism. And then all of a sudden you see skinheads and neo-Nazis in the room, and you see these fanatical German identitarians in your room, and they're talking about reviving the worship of Odin, and they're talking about bringing back Wagnerian Germanic religion. You shouldn't be surprised, because that is what German nationalism involves. The front for German nationalism is the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland Party. And they are the biggest German nationalist party. They are also the biggest German militarist party. Now, why is that? Why, when you have a German nationalist party, you see this ideology of militarism being so entrenched in their party? Why is that? Well, because you cannot separate militarism from German nationalism. Because if you look at the history of German nationalism, if you want to go back to Bismarck, because you brought up Bismarck in your question, if you go back to Bismarck, what do you see? German militarism, Prussian militarism. And then you go to World War I, what do you see? You see racism against Polish people. You see racism against Slavic people. You will read about talk of this apocalyptic war between the Germanians and the Latins and the Germanians and the Slavs, and how the Slavs are a lower race. They are inferior to the Germans. And you will also see in World War I the Germans facilitating the Armenian genocide. So people talk about World War I and World War II, and they'll say, well, World War I was bad, but in World War II, there was all this genocide that was happening. There was genocide happening during World War I, the Armenian genocide. 1 million Armenians were exterminated, and that genocide was facilitated by the German government. And if you don't believe me, I have done a video on this topic. It's in my channel. It's on the Armenian genocide. But in World War I, there was a high-level German military official by the name of Hans von Seeckt. And Hans von Seeckt supported the Armenian genocide. And when the Armenian church heard that the Ottomans wanted to genocide the Armenians, the Armenian church went to the German government. And they said, "Is this true? Is it true that your ally, the Turks, want to genocide us?" And the German government said, "Nein, no, our ally is not planning on doing any such thing." The Germans deliberately lied to the Armenians, saying that they had no reason to fear an Ottoman policy of extermination being imposed upon them, and behind closed doors, they were working with the Ottomans, conspiring with the Ottomans for the genocide of the Armenians. The Germans who were doing this evil, they weren't Nazis. There was no Nazi party, but they were German nationalists. And so if you look at the history of German nationalism, you find what? Mass murder. The first recorded genocide of the 20th century was the genocide of the Nama and the Herero peoples in Namibia, in Africa. And who orchestrated that genocide? It was the German government. The Germans genocided the people of Namibia. And the Germans who did this, they were not Nazis. They weren't Nazis. There was no Nazi party at that time, but they were German nationalists. And when the Germans were facilitating the Armenian genocide, they weren't Nazis. When Hans von Seeckt said, "Do not do anything to hinder the Armenian genocide, and do not even allow your own Christian morality to push you to try to stop the violence that is happening against the Armenian genocide," Hans von Seeckt was not a Nazi. There was no Nazi party, but he was a German nationalist. And Björn Höcke is a German nationalist. He wrote articles praising the Third Reich. He preaches about a future Messiah, a future Führer for Germany who is going to, quote unquote, bring glory to the Reich. Do you want Adolf Hitler? I think that's what Björn Höcke wants. I think he wants Hitler to come back from the dead. That's why he praised the Third Reich. And Björn Höcke said that Germany is the only country in the world that builds a monument of shame, and he was referring to a Holocaust memorial. And he says that Germany needs to have a 180-degree shift on how it sees the Holocaust. And if you look at the AfD is an evil party. It is an evil, Nazistic, Hitlerian party. It is. And I'm going to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about. And I've given you guys numerous examples already. I've talked about Björn Höcke's Nazism. I've talked about Alice Weidels' Nazism. But let me give you guys another figure who was once a leader of the AFD. His name is Holger Arpe. Holger Arpe was a member of the AFD. He was a German politician. And he would have these internet conversations, and he would say horrific things. Some things that this guy said were so horrific that I'm not even going to read them to you guys because it's just demonic. In one internet conversation, Arpe expressed, this is difficult for me to say this. It's difficult for me to say this. It's so disturbing. But he expressed pedophilic desire. And he talked about how he wants to murder the child. And it's just, oh my God. I was shocked reading this stuff. Shocked. And he was saying these things while being a leader of the AFD, an official of the AFD. And he would have these internet conversations with various people. And he had this conversation, he had this one particular conversation with two AFD leaders. They were Sandro Herzl and Tomas de Jesus Fernandez. And in this conversation with Herzl and Fernandez, this Arpe guy talked about how he wants to slaughter all of his political enemies. He wants to slaughter all of the members of the Social Democrats and the Greens. All the members of the Green Party and the Social Democratic Party of Germany. And he said that he wants to set up guillotine centers like in the French Revolution. And he wants to do mass decapitations of these people. We're talking about slaughtering one's political enemies. Now, people talk about how the AFD is a party of freedom, right? They're a party of freedom and democracy. And you had Vance doing a speech for the Munich Security Conference saying, oh, we're about democracy. And so in the name of democracy, all of the other mainstream parties of Germany must support the AFD or break the firewall and collaborate with the AFD and work with the AFD in the name of freedom. But no one's talking about how this atrocious way of rhetoric was being expressed between leaders of the AFD, talking about slaughtering one's political enemies. And you will say, well, Ted, Arpe was kicked out of the AFD only after the mainstream media of Germany exposed Arpe and leaked out the conversations to the public. It was only after the media exposed Arpe that the AFD eventually kicked him out. But that was because he was bad PR at that point. But according to Wikipedia, Arpe maintains contact with the AFD, especially with former colleagues from his Rostock District Association and with right-wing nationalist currents within his party. He attended a meeting of the nationalist wing on Rügen at the end of November 2019. In addition to MP Enrico Komning, the meeting was also attended by people from the Identitarian movement and the right-wing extremist prepper association Nordkreuz. So he went to this German nationalist meeting in 2019, and there was an MP for the AFD by the name of Enrico Komning who was in the meeting, who was at this nationalist meeting, and Arpe was there. And this was after he got kicked out of the party for expressing very, very horrific desires and fantasies, desires of slaughtering people like they did in the French Revolution. And so they will say, this is a party for freedom. Really? A party that had an official who wanted to slaughter all of his political enemies? In fact, I will read to you guys the quote from Arpe. He said this in 2015. He wrote that one had to destabilize the system through constant taunting. Then one had to first send all the red-green scum to the scaffold. The red-green scum, by red-green scum, he's referring to the Greens and the Social Democrats. So then one had to first send all the red-green scum to the scaffold, and then the guillotine up and down until the skin cracks. We have to proceed peacefully and carefully. That's the deception. Adapt if necessary and butter up the enemy. But when we're finally ready, we'll put them all up against the wall. Dig a pit, put everyone in, and put slaked lime on top. So he's talking about putting people in ditches, like what the Nazis did. That's what the Nazis did. The Nazis would do massacres and put people in ditches. They would do mass executions and put the bodies in ditches. This is what the Nazis did. And at the time that he was expressing this, he was a leader of the AFD. He was an official of the AFD. And the AFD didn't give a damn. The AFD didn't care because they support this type of rhetoric. They agree with him. But the only reason why they got rid of him was because he got exposed by the media. And all these people hate the mainstream media. Well, many times the mainstream media has helped the public by shedding light on this dark reality. It is an evil, diabolical party. And this identitarian movement that ARPE is a part of, that ARPE is an ally of, this identitarian movement that the AFD has an alliance with, is also extremely evil. Back in 2017, I confronted one of the leaders of the identitarian movement, Martin Zellner, who is really the leader of the German and Austrian branch of the identitarian movement. The identitarian movement is really just repackaged Nazism. That's all it is. And they are connected with the youth branch of the AFD. In fact, some time ago, the AFD had a youth meeting, and they were passing out flyers for the identitarian movement. And they were passing out flyers that said, "Blood is thicker than water." Now, why would they say that? Why would they say blood is thicker than water? Because they have a religion of race. They fixate on race. And if you look into this identitarian movement, look at their articles, look at what they write. Look at their official magazine, C-Session. It's called C-Session. And it's led by this guy named Gotz Kubitschek, who is a Nazi. And they will publish articles saying things like, Jews in Germany have certain privileges that native Germans don't have. And they describe focusing on the Holocaust as a cult. Now, why would they use such language? Why would they use such rhetoric? Because they want to make this stigma in which if you talk about the Holocaust, you are a member of a cult. And Elon Musk is helping with this very worldview by saying that Germany needs to stop talking so much about the Holocaust. It needs to stop focusing on past guilt. Now, what does that mean? What does that entail? It's quite obvious what that involves. That involves not talking about the Holocaust. This is a Nazi party.